This video game review contains spoilers from both the new Resident Evil 3 and the original, plus copious amounts of in-game swearing.
What the fuck?
So sit back and enjoy. Oh, and this game contains scenes of explicit violence and gore, yada yada yada. Well, good day there, Resident Evil lovers. Here today I have a review, yes, review, of Resident Evil 3, and I am going to be comparing it to the old game, which was released in 2000, which I still have my copy of right here. Yep, I actually queued up to get that in 2000. Early morning release. I purchased this on the day it was released. I didn't get to play it right away because I was working, and yeah. So this is very exciting for me because I've never actually officially done a video game review, except for the time I attempted it back when Resident Evil 2 came out. You know, so I do love my video games. So here is me, when I was 14 years old, reviewing Resident Evil 2 back in 1998.
Hello everybody, I just bought this really cool game. I'm so excited to play it. The graphics are amazing. It's got an advert for Dino Crisis. Can't wait to play it. It'll be such a good game. It's got 2 discs. Wow. So, graphics though. Can't get over the graphics. They're amazing. Yeah. Alexa, play some dramatic music. I'll put this in the PlayStation 3 and we'll get cracking.
PlayStation 1.
What?
It was a PlayStation 1 game.
What's that?
It's the previous console. And hang on a minute, they didn't have Alexas back then, in 1998.
How'd you listen to music?
We played it with a CD player.
Alright, CD player, play some dramatic music.
And that wasn't voice activated either.
Then how does it work?
You get up and you press buttons, you put in a CD.
I don't need to press buttons now. Why'd you have to do that?
Alright.
Resident Evil 2!
Okay, that wasn't me. That was my nephew. I did intend to record something, but by the time I got to it, the video game was already 19 years old. But moving on. First off, let's talk about the gameplay. This is my favorite part. Now, the intro, the first 10 minutes or the first 20 minutes of any video game should be enough to sell it. And this is exactly what this video game brings. Now, there is 20 years difference between the two games, since one came out in 2000, this one came out 2020. If you're really good at math, I think I worked that out correctly. The game is faster. Greater details, things are constantly jumping out at you all the time. It still has item chests, typewriters, so you can save your game. Similar unlocking devices like you got in the old game, such as lockpicks, using a tape recorder to unlock a door.
I'm goddamn Nathaniel Bard. I'm the best biologist you'll ever meet.
Also appears to be a slight fracture in his right arm just below the elbow.
So, and just like in the previous game, the game does start off in Jill's apartment. However, the big difference is that you actually get to walk around the apartment. At first, it starts off in a first-person view, which is pretty cool. You know, Resident Evil 6 did this, so why not? Whereas in the original game, there's like a little bit of an intro, and then suddenly you get this explosion, and then Jill comes flying through the door, and then there's a bunch of zombies behind her. Whereas in this case, it's like this proper epic 10 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever it is, you know, like just of running away from the Nemesis, just trying not to get hit by him. And likewise, you know, like it's full of surprises. You know, like you think you're going one way, he jumps out of somewhere, throws you somewhere. You know, like it's epic. It's heart pounding. It's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Okay, so let's talk about the Nemesis, the star of the show. First off, let me just tell you, he is less avoidable. Back in the old game, he was very easy to dodge. You know, like, you could just simply run away from him and then spin around and then run back, you know, and the beauty about the old game is that he wouldn't follow you through the door you just went through. In the new game, he will follow you all over the place. Unlike the old game, you seem to have many battles with him that you just cannot avoid. You know, you have to shoot him, you have to take him down so many times.
It's my turn, bitch!
With the old game, there were plenty of ways to avoid him, and plenty of ways not to fight him. And in the new game, every time he is defeated, he seems to come back bigger, stronger, scarier. One thing I will say though, compared to the old, the previous game, is whenever you knew who was coming, you know, you'd hear the thud of his footsteps, and you'd hear this stars. Thing about the new game, it's I don't know, is it just me, or I don't seem to be able to tell what he's saying. You know, he's only supposed to mutter the one word, and even that is mumbled. It's like, store. Alright, so let's talk about the characters. First off, I would just like to say the acting is so much better compared to the old game. Their reactions are more realistic, instead of like hands on hips, like, oh, look at that, there's a monster. Oh, I guess I should fight it now. Yeah, okay. Okay, let's start off with Jill. Fun fact, face model is Sasha Sotova. In this case, I thought that you know, throughout the game, you know, she was so much more badass than the previous one. She was, you know, like her facial expressions, everything.
It's me he's after.
Hey.
I'll buy you some time.
Hey, wait! Wait, Jill! No!
And moving on to Carlos.
Hey! Fuckface!
He is way more badass and pissed off than the original character was.
Who are you? What do you do?
Name's Carlos, and I'm saving you.
Whereas with Carlos in the original game, you know, like sometimes he came off like a bit of a wimp, sometimes he came off like a bit of a cheese star.
Wait, I have to ask you something.
I know. You want to ask me out? All the foxy ladies love my accent. It drives them crazy.
Which kind of led me to the realization that the acting really wasn't that good. Okay, so now let's talk about Brad. Now, Brad in the original game, well, he actually appeared at the end of the original first game, where he rescues you from the mansion before it blows up. Just like in the original Resident Evil, you first come across Brad in a bar. However, in this case, while Brad is trying to secure the door, he then gets bitten. And after that cutscene, you don't see Brad again until later, when he is seen biting Marvin. Now then, let's talk about Marvin. Okay, we all remember Marvin from the original Resident Evil 2, and he also was in the new Resident Evil 2. And in this fun fact, Resident Evil 3 is based 24 hours before the events of Resident Evil 2. So, in this case, in this story, it turns out that Brad was the one that caused Marvin's injuries to be bitten in the chest. Lower abdomen area. This kind of area, yeah. Whereas in the original game, it was never actually determined how Marvin got his injury. He'd obviously been battling some sort of zombie attack. In the original game, you know that around this time that Marvin should be in that room somewhere, and you do actually happen to come across him. But he is just unconscious, lying on the floor, and he's holding a piece of paper that you can read if you like. Whereas in the new game, it is just simply shown him being attacked by Brad. Now let's talk about Tyrell. Tyrell has more of a role in this game than he did in the previous one. Where in the new game he's actually very involved with helping Carlos, helping Jill. He's basically seems to be quite around quite a lot. Whereas in the old game, Tyrell blew himself up with a hand grenade to try and save Carlos from Nicolai. Whereas in the new game, he actually helps out quite a bit and ultimately he dies a hero. Now let's talk about Mihail. In the new game, he has more of an active role.
Let's go.
He's carry on being in command, even though he is injured, just like he was in the previous game. However, he does seem to be able to carry on controlling and carry on commanding, so that was very, very good. In the old game, he pretty much just laid down and rested.
Everything is gonna be okay.
In the original game, when Nemesis boarded the train, he basically told Jill to get out of there so he could take care of the Nemesis.
Get out of the cable car now!
Mihail, wait, don't!
Get out of here! Hurry!
Whereas he then sacrificed himself and died a hero. Remake, it was a lot more dramatic as to how that happened, but again, he dies a hero.
Get off my train, shitbird!
Okay, let's talk about Murphy. In the original game, we didn't see much of Murphy except for the time when he was about to turn into a zombie and he was begging Carlos to shoot him. Whereas in the remake, he is found by Jill with wounds that looked a little bit suspect. He then went ahead and tried to convince Jill that they were not bites. However, it was not enough to convince Nicolai.
No, wait, please!
So ultimately, Murphy just had probably the same amount of appearance time as he did in the old game. Now let's talk about Nicolai. Throughout the gameplay, Nicolai is explaining his evil plan, just throughout various different times and cutscenes, whereas pretty much in the old one he was a bit vague on that.
What's going on?
I'm one of the supervisors. That's all you need to know.
Well, okay then. Now the story of the new Resident Evil 3 is pretty much the same. However, there is one extra little bit of the mission that they have changed within the story. You are then tasked to go find a vaccine, and that way it might save the city. You put in all that hard work and effort, and ultimately at the end, it gets destroyed by Nicolai.
No! Do you have any idea what you've just done?
Boo, Nicolai! Boo! Whereas in the original game, the whole point of the story was just simply to try and escape the city. One thing I really love about remakes is when they use some of the original dialogue.
I'd rather starve to death in here than be eaten by one of those undead monsters! Now leave me alone!
I'd rather starve to death in here than be eaten by one of those undead monsters! Now leave me alone!
You want stars? I'll give you stars.
You want stars? I'll give you stars.
Okay then, moving on to locations. There's quite a lot of things that we do recognize throughout the game, like the bar where you eat Brad, the train, the power station, the clock tower, and the hospital. However, in the remake, there is no graveyard and there is no gas station. They do, however, visit the police station like from Resident Evil 2, but however, you're not playing as Jill, you're playing as Carlos. But however, I would just like to take a moment to talk about the clock tower. Now, in the original game, the clock tower, you know, is a particular special part of my memory of the original game. And it did host the actual battle with the Nemesis, the one that was mandatory, the one that you couldn't run away from. And but at the same time, you did a lot in the clock tower. There was puzzles, there was doors to open, you know, like there was so much stuff that was going on in that clock tower. Whereas in this case, unless you actually looked up and, you know, you thought, oh yeah, I'm at the clock tower. Oh, there's the Nemesis, I guess I'm gonna fight him now. Alright then, okay. Yeah. Now let's talk about the differences between the old game and the new game. Now the new game is pretty much the same as the old game. Now in the new game, pretty much whatever you do, wherever you go, everything stays the same. There are slight character differences, such as people's demises, or how they help you, or stuff like this, you know, compared to the old game. But again, nothing really changes the more times that you play it. However, the old game had multiple endings. 2 endings, in fact. The old game had that many scenarios, I can't even count them off the top of my head. I have actually replayed the game to record the footage, and even I cannot count them. There are many times throughout the game that it will give you these options, you know, whether to stay and fight, or to run away, or jump out the window, or, you know, like either or, there's plenty of different options. Ultimately, one option will change the gameplay throughout. So let's say you come back, play the game again, you choose the other option, you will notice a difference. And it could be something as subtle as, you know, when you first hear or see Carlos, you know, like if your first reaction is to go run towards him. Whereas in the old game, if you were to simply think, he don't need any help, turn around, and if you were to go the other way around to the cafe, then you don't meet Carlos in the cafe. However, later, you would actually meet him in the newspaper. Also, such as events such as the gas station, for example, you know, like when you walk into the gas station, somebody will always follow you in there. Now then, it all ultimately depends on whether it's going to be Carlos or it's going to be Nicolai. If Carlos happens to walk into the gas station, then later on in the game, Carlos will actually help you when the Nemesis comes to the clock tower, and he will actually go ahead and shoot the bazooka out of the Nemesis's hands. If you were to choose to go the other way, you know, pretty much at the start of the game, then later, Nicolai would actually follow you into the gas station, and then pretty much then Carlos wouldn't be there to blast the bazooka out of the Nemesis's hands, so the Nemesis would still have it, so he would still be able to shoot you with bazooka darts. I think that's what they're called. But also, it had so much randomization. If you were to walk past a window, you know, in one time, then dogs might jump out of it. If you were to replay the game again, then birds might jump out of it. And you don't even have to restart the game again. It could be completely random. If you were to die and go back to your previous save point, and then walk back again, even in the same gameplay, it could be something completely different. One thing also that could change an entire cutscene, if you were not to shoot the barrel by the train, then later when you happen to go back and you see Mihail fighting off a bunch of zombies, he will either just simply shoot them, or if you didn't shoot the barrel before, he will actually roll the barrel and then shoot the barrel. Yeah, I know, it's just brilliant. So for that, my question is, if there was that much randomization in a 20-year-old game with hardly any space for all that data, then why couldn't they have done it in the new one? I don't know, I'm just saying. Okay, puzzles. We all love a good puzzle. One thing about the previous game is it was full of these many weird, wonderful puzzles. And again, they were random. So if you were to completely memorize the codes from one puzzle, if you were to replay the game again, they would be completely randomized. They would change. You know, and there were so many of these things. It was as simple as, like in the hospital, for example, when you're playing as Carlos, you had to basically move something over a particular plate. You know, if you played the game again and you moved it over the same plate as you did last time, more than likely it would not work. It would just simply give you a shock. Whereas you would need to keep leaving the room, coming back in, and then it would just magically reappear where it was. And you just go ahead and you got 3 other attempts to do it. And yeah, so stuff like that. And that would be completely random. Whereas in the new game, you know, you can just simply look the codes up if you don't really want to look at them. You know, there was, I mean, I already know all the codes in the new game, so there's no point reading everything. Yeah, kind of took the fun away from it. Now let's talk about the monsters. First off, it's got zombies. Duh. However, zombies with surprises. Most of the time the surprise would simply be you think you've killed it, you think you shot it in the head a whole bunch of times. In the original game, you know that that zombie is totaled when you see that big satisfying blood pool. Whereas in the new game, there's no blood pile or anything dead, so how on earth do you know that the zombie's really dead? So you simply have to just go up to it and pop a couple more shots in its head. Yeah, that's, you know. But then later a zombie's head might explode and something weird and long might come out of it and start attacking you. So ultimately they are a little bit harder to kill than the original game. And of course they have lickers, like they did in the previous game. However, there is no earthworm!
What is that?
There's no earthworm that kind of jumps out at you randomly or occasionally. And, you know, instead you come across these kind of things that look like sharks with legs. Yeah, they can be rather nasty if you happen to get eaten by one. So let's now move on to the end of the game. Alright then. Now, for those of you that didn't realize, that's the part of the game that ends. Ultimately, a really horrific morphed version of the Nemesis will jump out at you. However, in the new game, he is terrifyingly large.
Just so you know, this is the last fucking time.
And it's pretty much almost like the original game, whereas to get the rail cannon moving, you had to, you know, like slide in these big giant charging piston thingies, and all of them had to be charged for the rail cannon to fire. Whereas in the original game, he was very easily avoidable. You know, he was moving that slow, he'd be all like, come here, come here. Oh my god, he has big giant hands, tentacles, everything, you know. And if you happen to be playing in Nightmare or Inferno mode, oh my god, that could be really, really challenging. It's very challenging, it is terrifying, but it's a lot of fun. It really is. Major downside, you can complete the game in under 2 hours. Literally, there's an achievement to complete the game in under 2 hours. Okay. The original game, the best I actually did was about 3:05, and that was after playing it 16 times in a row. And maybe it's because of the randomized puzzles that take a little bit longer, you know, and things like this, or I don't know, the lack of cutscenes, there's all sorts of stuff. I really don't know. In my opinion, if you're going to pay all that money for a game, you want it to be longer. And like I said about the old game, there were 2 endings. Now, the second ending, which ultimately they were both good endings, it depended on what you did, the very last option that you had before you actually entered the sewer. It all depends on whether you choose to not fight the Nemesis, push him off the bridge, or whether you just simply decide to jump off the bridge. Where ultimately that also leads to Carlos either being a wimp or saving your ass.
I can't handle it. Rescuing you is becoming a full-time job.
So ending number 1, Carlos simply flies the helicopter away, you all survive, they all live happily ever after. Ending number 2, in this scenario, if you were to choose to simply jump off the bridge and not fight the Nemesis, then later you would actually go the back way around the sewer, which in my opinion is actually a little bit quicker, you get everything done, yada yada yada. But Nicolai doesn't meet the same demise, however, if you were to decide to push the Nemesis off the bridge. If we were going for ending 2, while you're in the control room, Nicolai will then fly the helicopter up, he'll start firing at you, and you get the choice of whether to negotiate with him or fire back. If you decide to try and negotiate with him, then you'll simply talk a little bit and then you'll fly away, off into the moonlight. However, if you decide to fire back, you shoot him a bunch of times and then the helicopter will simply crash, and Nicolai will meet his demise. And then Carlos will walk in and say, "Hey, where's my helicopter at? No!" You then walk out, and it turns out that a helicopter has come to pick you up.
There's a second chopper, and it's here to rescue you.
And it turns out it's Barry.
I couldn't let you die.
Is it you?
So now that leads me to talk about the end credits. Now the end credits were awesome in the original game, mainly because of the theme music. So ultimately, when the end credits of the new game rolled up, and I didn't hear that music right away, I was a bit, but then all of a sudden I was like, huh? Whereas they had actually redone the whole thing, and it sounds awesome. And it was longer, so it just meant longer amount of awesomeness. So, and the conclusion! This game, the remake, is very, very enjoyable. However, not a patch on the old one. So, can I recommend Resident Evil 3? I can. However, I can highly recommend Resident Evil 3.
Next time, take the fucking hit!
If you ever cannot find yourself a copy, you can find it on the PlayStation Network. I'm not sure if that is Xbox, I haven't actually tried it.
Are you ready to finish this?
Well, thank you very much for watching. This was my first ever video game review.
Good riddance.
So I hope you liked it. See you soon.
So long, RC.
Do you know I was your age when this game came out?
You were my age?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm 21 years older than you.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's old.
Yeah, I'll remind you of that later. 21 years time. Yeah. He's gonna be so old.